Good afternoon. My name is Ken Bailey. I am an adult in my middle age. I have lived for a number of years in a place other than the place that this short video is about. But I grew up as a kid in the Rangeley Oil Basin in western Colorado. There's not a whole lot in Rangeley for kids to do. Kids are still saying that today, many years later, and they were saying it many years before I came along. But I was one of those kids who, for whatever reason, just kind of fell in love with the Rangeley oil field. When one of my school teachers got me interested in photography, I kind of made it my mission to photograph the various different types of pumps and installations, and I watched carefully all the different stuff going in and out of the field and the different moves and what happened to the different wells. As a result, even though it's many years later, I've got quite a collection of amateur vintage photographs of vintage oil field equipment. My other hobby is cartooning, and so I would like to take you now on a visual tour of the Rangeley oil field, starting with some old drawings and then taking you into some of the old photographs. What you see here is a shallow pump. This is actually rather modern for its time, national brand pump, and that's me. The shallow wells were the first ones to come to Rangeley. They started drilling there not long after the turn of the last century, somewhere around 1906 or 1907, sucking out of something called the Manco Shale, less than 1,000 feet down. There were a number of wells that were in and out of the shallow fields and produced a smattering here and a smattering there. There was also a struggling little refinery and a hardscrabble little oil field company in what was then called Raven Park that made a go of it for a number of years until 1933, when it was suggested they drill a deep well. The deep well was a success. Due to the remoteness of the area, the great boom did not happen until the World War II years, but by the time the boom was done, there were 800 wells. Well, not quite, I get ahead of myself. 500 oil wells, a mile deep, drilling out of the much deeper Weber sands, a much richer find than the Manco Shale had been. And by the time my family moved there in the mid-1960s, the boom and boomers had moved on, and the town had settled down to about 2,000 people in this giant oil field. So let's look at some of the different types of oil field operations, and then we'll get to the pictures. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear. When it was the mid-1960s, we all wore ridiculous clothes, and so this is me as I am now, talking to me as I was then, and returning to the place of my youth. I should have said, kid, get down to the clothing store and get yourself some different pants, but that's another story. This is basically how an oil field like Rangeley works. Rangeley was a geologic formation known as an anticline. Now, anti, of course, means upside down, and so an anticline was like an upside down bowl, filled with these Weber sands into which three different types of fluid eventually collected. On the top you had natural gas, in the middle you had oil, and underneath you had water. And you see oil wells drilling down here. The ones in the center tapped into the natural gas on top. This was discovered first, and then the ones that went a little deeper tapped into the oil, and on the bottom was the water. And this is called a trap because the area in which these three materials are is known as, they're surrounded by hard capstone, and so it's known as the oil is trapped there. That's the whole reason it could collect and be harvested. Oil wells that drilled too far out just ran into the capstone and were called dry holes or dusters. This is the type of oil well that generations watching television might identify with, a large silver tower called a derrick. This is taken from an old photo that was taken at it's now at the Rangeley Museum, showing them actually sinking a well on the side of Mellon Hill, probably in the mid-1940s. The purpose for the tower was to hold the sections of pipe where they could be stacked before they were screwed together and dropped into the hole as the drilling bit drilled it. This is what has replaced the derrick. Technically, the tower is still called a derrick, but this is what we call a drilling rig. Problem with derricks is when the well was done being drilled, they had to take them apart like a giant puzzle and then reassemble them over the next well site. Someone finally came up with the idea of making a tower that could actually pivot and fold over on itself. And then you could just attach a truck to each end. One would go forward, one would go backward, and it could drive the whole tower intact to the next well. While these are not as picturesque as the more permanent towers, this is what you see today. This is what you used to see. It looks a little like the drilling derrick, but this is a smaller version. This is called a standard derrick. When the well was put into production, they put a pumper on it that would go up and down and suck the oil from the earth. But what the pumper did by that up and down movement was pulled a long string of rods up and down from the oil trap below. It works a little bit like the same as a pump that you pump by hand on a farm, only on a much larger scale. Well, if one of those pipe sections would break, they would have to stop the well and then pull the pipe sections out and unscrew them, one section at a time, until they found the one with the break. So they needed a place to stack these sections as they pulled them out of the hole. So what they would do is they would assemble a tower like this over the well, and this tower would hold the stack of pipes. Those of us who are older can remember the days when if you said oil field, you thought of a place with row upon row of these towers lined up like little tin soldiers. Well, as with all things, time moved forward and pretty soon new technology came along. Somebody came up with the idea of a tower that could be telescoped into itself and then folded onto the top of a big truck. This way you could take all the permanent towers down and then drive this portable tower from well to well as wells needed service. On the left bottom you can see a pumping unit, and the truck is there on the right, and they have the tower set up. You can even, if you look carefully, see some of the sections of rod vertically stacked against the tower. This makes a lot more sense. It's much more economical, but those of us romantics who don't actually have to pay for operations hated them because it meant the rows of permanent towers all disappeared very quickly. Okay, let's get on to the type of pumping units. When an oil field is brand new, the oil may flow to the surface by itself. In fact, it may come roaring up with such power that it comes gushing out of the hole, thus the name gusher. Modern oil wells, of course, have blowout protectors. They're special valves that can be closed so oil wells don't gush out of control. But pretty soon the pressure that forces the oil up may drop off, and then you need some sort of sucking device on the surface, and this is called a pumping unit. Now we'll start with the little guys and move up bigger. Pumping units, they generally, the ones that pull rods up and down out of the well hole, are known as rod pumping units, and they're usually run by something called a walking beam. What it is pretty much what it sounds like. There is some sort of A-frame that provides a pivot on which a beam is placed like a seesaw. On one end of the beam connects to the rod coming out of the ground. You can see it on the left side here. And on the other end of the beam you need some sort of counterweight because the rod is very heavy, and so in order for the beam to go up and down on the pivot, you need a weight on the other end to counterbalance the weight of the rod on the first end. Then you need a crank to go around, and the crank is connected to some sort of arm that goes up to the walking beam. You can see between the counterweight, which in this case is stacked on the end of the beam, kind of like a weightlifter stacks weights on the end of his pole to make barbells. You see a set of two arms that are connected at the top to the walking beam and at the bottom to the crank. As the crank goes around, the arms push the balanced walking beam up and down, which gives it a funny nodding motion that early oilmen referred to as walking, thus the name. Okay, this is a slightly bigger walking beam pump. This type of design is called a conventional design. The one difference between this one and the smaller one is instead of stacking the counterweights on the end of the walking beam, they put them down below on the crank that goes around. Now on this one, the pipe coming out of the ground, the rod string as it's called, is on the right. And so the crank counterbalancing it on the other side of the A-frame, or the pivot, is on the left. And they have attached what looks like two big round slabs of iron usually, or some other heavy material, on the crank, which gives the same counterbalance effect as the big box of weights on the end of the beam in the last picture. This is perhaps the strangest looking walking beam pump you might see in a field today. This oil field workers call this a grasshopper. It's actually a design that I believe is owned by the Lufkin Company, a large maker of pumps. Lufkin's name for it is Mark II. Some people call it a unitorque, but basically this is a much bigger brother of the conventional pump you saw in the last drawing. On this one, the arms are up right toward the front, toward where the rod string comes out of the ground, but they are on a very long crank so that the arms are connected to one end of the crank and the counterweights to the other. So as the pump goes up and down, it looks like it's kind of bowing, like you might bow to a foreign potentate. As these counterweights go around, it's a very clumsy looking thing, and yet to watch it in motion is like watching ballet. It is truly beautiful, and it can lift that rod string out of the ground a great distance. This was the biggest player in the Rangeley oil field. This is called an air balance walking beam pump. Now you might say, all right, where's the counterweights on this one? I don't see any. Well, that's because there weren't any. This one used something else. As with all pumps, the job is to get the long rod string to come up and down out of the oil well wellhead, which you see on the right. As with the other pumps, this one has arms that lift the walking beam up and down. The arms are attached to a rotating crank. But in between the arms and the rod string is what looks like a giant air cylinder. It's the bigger brother of the thing on top of your screen door that keeps your screen door from slamming. And in this case, same principle, it pushes the oil well up and down. As the well comes down, that giant cylinder comes down and air is compressed or squashed inside it. Now when most of us get squashed, we want to push back, and it's the same principle here. When the well is all the way in the down position, the oil pump that is, the air squashed inside that cylinder wants to push back, so it literally pushes the cylinder back up, which helps to push up the walking beam. By the way, that large funny looking thing on the front of the long beam, the thing that connects the beam to the rod string from the oil well, it looks a little like a giant slice of pie in this picture. That is called the horse's head. Early oil field workers and designers, always with a sense of humor, noticing the walking beam going up and down, noticed how it looks a little like a horse that is nodding, or some people even call them the nodding donkey. Well, right where the horse's head would be, they have a big metal pie-shaped thing that not only provides some more counterbalancing weight, but helps it contains steel cables that actually pull the rod out of the oil well. And it gives them a nice, gentle, curving surface to ride on as the well goes up and down. This further made it look like a head. And then there's a little eye hole at the top. You can see it in this drawing. I think that is something to connect a hook to when you have to pull the thing off. But whatever, it looks a little like the eye of the horse, and so thus it's called the horse's head. Okay. Oh boy, I hate to even have to show you this as a great fan of oil field pumping units, but this is what happens when technology marches forward again. This funny little box with the light on the top runs what is called a submersible pump. I think it works a little like the sump pump in your basement, but basically it's an electronic or electric pump that they can actually put right down at the bottom of the oil well underground that forces the fluid up. So you don't need a walking beam going up and down at all on the surface. During my years in Rangeley, I watched what had been, at one time, almost 400 walking beam pumps pretty much wiped out one by one as they put these electric pumps in. There'd be nothing to watch during the daytime, there'd be nothing moving, but at night, I assumed the light on top of the little control box was to tell you if the thing was working or not. And as you drove through the oil field at night, there were hundreds of these little lights lit. This is a gas injection well. As you suck more and more oil out of the oil field, the stuff that is down there is harder and harder to get at. So they have come up with different ways of putting various fluids or gases back into the underground trap, which pushes the remaining oil toward the remaining producing oil wells. Often on the surface you just see what's left of the wellhead. There is no pumping unit because the fluid's now going down instead of coming up. By the way, oil field workers call the wellhead the Christmas tree. Looks a little like a Christmas tree. I suppose we could call it a holiday oil well, but it's just not as romantic. We'll stick with Christmas tree. Okay, I told you I was a cartoonist. There are two of my superheroes posing by an oil well. You know it just had to happen sooner or later. There's the color version, and a very early drawing. My real-life wife was not quite as delighted to spend hours with her idiot husband in the oil field when we went back to visit, as this female superhero is, but she was a good girl about it. And so I think it's time we leave this and we move back and look at more of the pictures. In fact, I'll tell you what, it's been 15 minutes, so for those of you that are saying, the heck with this, I want to go get a sandwich and watch something really entertaining, I'll let you guys go and I will make a fresh video of the photographs. So for those of you that want to see more, just stay on my page and look for the sequel. For the rest of you, thank you for being tolerant and patient. Have a nice day.